getting ready for our shoot today. Because today, we're reviewing the Bag Builder automobiles.
Automobiles is a light-medium racing Euro game for 2 to 5 players by AEG.
Vroom vroom!
In Automobiles, which is a bag builder, a branch of the deck building genre, you collect cubes in order to improve the efficiency of your car. Throughout the course of the game, you will use those cubes to race around the track, weaving in and out of cars, and then eventually drafting them in order to prevent yourself from accumulating wear.
Which can slow you down both literally and figuratively.
Automobiles is a variable length game from 1 to 7 laps, with shorter games favoring faster, zippier cars, and longer games favoring players who build more efficient bags. In Automobiles, the player who crosses furthest over the finish line on the final lap is declared the winner of the race.
Gameplay starts right with setup. The colorful cubes vary in effect from game to game, depending on card choice.
So for instance, yellow cubes might be engineers, card chiefs, managers, or mechanics.
All players start with white cubes, gray cubes, and yellow cubes, but also have starting money to customize their bags.
So I might choose, for instance, to start with a couple extra green cubes at the beginning of the game. Each turn, you will have drawn 7 cubes to perform various actions. Every cube color indicates a different kind of ability, so white, light gray, dark gray, and black cubes indicate where on the automobile track you can drive. Yellow cubes modify the cube composition of your bag, purple cubes remove wear, whereas red, blue, and green cubes are all used to race in one fashion or another.
For example, the aerodynamics card, which is a red cube modifier, makes it so you are prevented from accumulating wear even when you're not drafting another car. For cubes that you can't or don't want to use for racing purposes, you can instead use to purchase new cubes for the cost listed on the top right corner of the corresponding card. The purchased cubes, as well as the cubes used to purchase them, are then moved into the use pile. Then, you move your racing car along the path indicated by your racing cubes, and those cubes also get added into the use pile.
At the end of your turn, you're going to accumulate wear based on the darkest color of track you traveled on throughout the course of that turn.
Essentially, the faster you travel on a turn, the more wear you accumulate.
The exception is if you manage to draft. If you end your turn directly behind, or even one segment behind another player, you do not accumulate any wear at all. Regardless, any wear acquired and your used cubes then move into your discard pile. Afterwards, you draw 7 cubes from your bag. Like any deck builder, if you can't draw any cubes from your bag, you then take everything from your discard pile, essentially doing a reshuffle, and throw them back into your bag. You continue drawing up until you have 7.
Every time your car passes the finish line, you begin a new lap. On the final lap of the game, the first car to pass the finish line triggers the end of the game. At this point, the round finishes out, and the car that has moved the furthest past the finish line wins the game.
And come from behind victory.
Okay, so that's automobiles. Let's talk about player interaction.
Yeah, so deck builders, or bag builders in this case, are notorious for having very limited player interaction. This one does a good job with it though, because you have a board that you actually move around and you need to draft, or you can even block each other while you're racing.
Yeah, and it can be really great. Like, there's some fun moments in that. I think that it really depends on your game group and who you're playing with, kind of how that plays out.
Sure.
We had a situation in a game where I was drafting behind Whale, and I was set to cross the finish line and likely win that next round. And because Whale is a very strategic game player, it made way more sense for him to just stay put a turn and have me blocked so I couldn't move, which was generally a pretty frustrating experience and took away from the feeling of the racing of the game.
Yeah, compared to a deck builder, you would have your hand as secret, but I could look and see what your pile of cubes looks like, and it actually can lead to a little bit of analysis paralysis if you have those kinds of players. It's pretty rare, but it does come up in those certain circumstances.
Yeah, so that's something that may come up with your game group or not, and it might be fun or it might be frustrating.
Yeah. Some of the cards in this game, they care a lot about what other players are doing. I might want to have the most blue cubes because I'm comparing to your discard pile, or my green cubes are more effective if other players have green cubes.
Yeah, so I think that really points to the fact that the the player interaction can kind of really vary depending on which cards you draw for the color cubes.
Yep.
And there's also something that is really analogous to deck building, is there is a limited number of these color cards, or cubes. So if people are all taking the similar strategy, taking the same cubes, they're going to go pretty quickly, and that's really going to... So there's going to that fight aspect is part of the interaction.
Yeah, which is almost surprising in this one. In Dominion you have 10 cards or whatever, and this one it looks like there's a lot more than that. There are a lot more cubes. People tend to buy them up faster. They tend to disappear, particularly in a 5-player game.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Yeah. One thing that is a problem is that despite this cool mechanic of interacting with each other on the board, if the race strings out, all of a sudden all those mechanics just sort of disappear. If you can't be drafting people because you're all just kind of pitter-pattering around each other, it sort of ends up taking away the part that is the neatest in the interaction.
Yeah, and I think that that's something you're more likely to encounter when you are not playing a 5-player game, if you're playing a 2 or 3-player game.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, this is still a Euro game. The interaction is limited, but I would say better than your typical deck builder.
Absolutely.
Okay, Squid, hit me with your thoughts on theme.
Yeah, well, I think that, this is a really fun theme, and it's something that we've seen in, other games, like a Formula Day, obviously, most famously. There are other racing games out there. But I think that there are some really fun ways that both kind of in the board setup and the various mechanics of the game really play up the theme in a really fun way. I like when you look at the board, and this is the most simplest of the maps, there are also other ones, it really makes sense having, for example, in this simple board, slower movement inward and having faster bits on the outside of the track, right? Like, that's how I think of racing. And when I'm plotting out my course, I can actually envision what my car is doing, and that's really fun.
Yeah.
I really like that aspect of the game.
Yeah, and actually that moving around the board thing is really, if you think about it, victory points. This game doesn't have victory points, it's winning the race. And every time I'm moving, it's a very good replacement, very clean thematic replacement for I'm just scoring victory points as you're moving.
Yeah, I wouldn't agree that those are victory points. I think that doesn't make any sense, but I do think that the scoring actually makes sense for what type of game this is, right? That the game is just whoever moves the furthest at the end, whoever crosses that finish line and moves the furthest wins the game, as opposed to at the end of the game you stop and you count up points.
Yeah. And I think they do a really neat job with the drafting mechanic. I'm surprised that they managed to make the drafting mechanic feel so smoothly integrated into the game. Mm-hmm. But one thing that doesn't feel as smoothly integrated to me is that it's a bag builder. I'm getting extra turbo. I'm getting extra aerodynamics in the middle of the race, and I can just think of this like Mad Max guy who's like stapling on extra engine power as I'm driving, and I find that to be a little bit odd.
Yeah, I think that's fair to some extent. Not that I am a racing aficionado, but they do stop and replace tires in the middle of tracks and whatever. But I think more importantly, I kind of disagree in the fact that I think that that's a little bit of a nitpicky point. I think the larger thematic point when it comes to these cards that is really fun is how what the card is really aligns really nicely to what the effect is on the cube, right? That there's this like really fun thing when I'm picking up a pit team, what it does for me makes sense. And
yeah.
I think that's really fun.
Yeah, I like that I can like build the roadster and just say like I'm doing this crazy turn and I'm burning out all the tires and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really lends itself to the storytelling, particularly when you have your strategy of which cubes you're going for and how they come out throughout the game. You then have a story of your car, and that's super fun.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's transition now talking about the mechanisms of this game.
Yeah, so one thing is that I love the bag building over deck building. It's more tactile, it's cleaner, there's less of that shuffling mess, and it feels unique, even though it's the exact same mechanic, really.
Yeah, I actually have to say I'm not a huge fan of deck building games. I get a little lost in them. I'm never as good as the people I play with. Whereas this is really accessible, and I find that when we are teaching kind of newer gamers too, it's something that makes sense to them in a way that having them have to read text of a card, even though technically you have to here. So there's something about just the visual and the tactile cues of this that make it really accessible and really fun, even for people that aren't as skilled or like deck building as much.
And I think a lot of that is in what we already talked about, that the driving, the like white, gray, and the drafting, the wear cubes, it makes perfect sense to people. When you show it to them, like, oh, perfect, that makes perfect sense to me.
And actually, if for folks that are new to it or overwhelmed by the modifiers, you can really just play this game with these cubes, right? Like, as a player. You're probably not going to win, but when you're getting used to the game, if you're not used to this style of thing, it's easy to modify it.
Right. My thing that I don't like about the mechanisms is that these colorful cube cards are not created equal. The green and blue ones especially, there's a couple in there that are just so game breaking or game warping that you either need to focus on that strategy or the one player who does, unless everybody goes out of the way to stop them, they should run away with the game.
Yeah, and I think that, it really depends too on what the combination of the cards coming out, because sometimes, the way that, for example, like red and green will work together, or, or if there's something that's much weaker in one category than another, that really influences that. So, I mean, if you're particularly pulling stuff out at random and not being thoughtful in your choices there, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's clean because of how tight it is, and that's a good thing, but the bad thing about it is that if we see, and you and I say, oh, okay, that's the best strategy of this game, then it's really just going to come down to a coin toss of like who has drawn their cubes out in the best order, which I guess is true for deck building games in general, but for some reason it sticks out to me in this game.
Yeah, I think we should also mention too that the tactical decision making, and again, this kind of fits into like a deck building thing. It happens when you're choosing your cubes, and as you build your bag, when you're getting rid of cubes. Once you're actually pulling out your 7 cubes for your turn, it's pretty straightforward what you're going to be doing with it, right? And so that you have to think about the limits of what the tactics are here.
Yeah, agreed.
Cool.
Okay, Squid, novelty and replayability.
Yeah. So I think we've talked about over and over again in this review that we really love this the bag building mechanic, and that is something that I think is really novel. Plays off of something very common that we all know, but does something fun with it. I think that the racing game theme, not so novel.
Sure.
And you can kind of see that in even the art on the board. It's kind of boring.
Yeah, the audience is literally gray splotches.
Yeah. In terms of replayability, there are these different cards. You can come up with different combinations. It does kind of make it a little bit of a new game where you have different tactics that you're playing with in each game that you play.
Yeah. There is replayability in that. You want to explore all of them, but after a little while, after a couple games of it, I feel like you've seen most of it, and there aren't a ton of opportunities to find really cool, smart combos, which is what I like to find in deck building games.
Sure.
It's a little bit more of a kind of an efficiency system, and every once in a while I have built something that's like, this is my sweet combo engine, and that's been a lot of fun, but it doesn't pop up as often as I see in a fair number of these other types of games.
That's a fair point. And I think there's a similar thing to be said about the maps. Like, there are 2 maps that come in the base game, and so you do have a little bit of replayability there, but you kind of get used to it.
Yeah, actually I almost feel like the map design space could be a little bit more fleshed out. In fact, we had a friend of ours build some other maps, and we tried those, and they had this or that problem because they weren't playtested or anything, but it was fun to do something a little bit different.
Yeah, and that is something that if you are creative and have the time, you can do, right? Because it's just a map, and so you can build your own if you want to expand that replayability.
Yeah, and they did just come out with an expansion for this, which I haven't had the chance to play yet, but I do think that adds to that feeling if you really like this game, which we do.
Absolutely.
All right, Squid, that was automobiles. What are our final thoughts here?
Yeah, well, it's a fun game. It's a game that we have played actually a number of times, and I think part of the reason why is it does have these like novel aspects of the bag building, which we've talked about ad nauseum, and it's also a very accessible game for different levels of players. It plays fairly quickly if you let it, and it's fun.
Yeah, I like it most with more players because you have more of that interaction. I think that the component of the board works well with the bag building / deck building mechanic, and that feels like it's a nice little innovation to the genre, and I enjoy that part of it.
I think that it's important to keep in mind that it is a light game.
Yeah.
It's not for people that are looking for something with heavy strategy or even
novel tactics, it's gonna fall flat.
Yeah, I agree. It's a limited amount of that kind of thing, but you can feel like you build up a little thing. It's a fun little game. It plays pretty quickly, and once you have it down, it's going to be done in about an hour, and it goes nice. Now that being said, it depends on how many laps you're going to choose. I personally think that like 3 or 4 laps is sort of the sweet spot. When you get into the longer games, you can build cooler bags, but at the same time, it just sort of tends to drag on, and I think that's kind of a problem. It doesn't necessarily have the scope is not appropriate.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and also keeping in mind who you're playing the game with will really impact the gameplay as well.
Yeah, but this is a game that we would definitely recommend. We think that you can play it with most people, and you'll probably want to play it a handful of times. It's not going to be anything that blows you out of the water, but it's fresh and it's fun.
Absolutely. All right, see you next time.